lock this door. Okay, I think there's a few more people that are coming back, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm Darrell Hardy, and like everybody else today, I'm shamelessly pushing the book, and if you weren't in here before, we do have coupons up here that will give you 40% off. We tried to get some free books to give away, but it actually doesn't go to the press till the 10th, and they're actually going to start shipping on the 17th. So we're excited about that. Most of you were here last time, but just to make sure I'm looking from the front instead of the back, how many of you here feel yourself pretty familiar with DotNetNuke? Okay, that gives me a good idea. How many of you feel like you're very familiar with the architecture of DotNetNuke? A couple. Okay. Well, I'm going to start with this slide here. I wasn't planning on spending a lot of time on this, but since we have several people that aren't familiar with the architecture, I want to give you an overall look of it from this standpoint. You notice that we have several layers here. We have a presentation layer. You might consider those two combined. Business logic layer, a data access layer, and a database server. So what happens, and Stan's going to go through this a lot more in detail, so I don't want to spend a lot of time as he builds the module. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But the idea is you have a browser, it calls the default page. Oh, by the way, this is slightly wrong here. There should also be another box that we'll talk about a little bit later. If you write your own module, or you use one of the DotNetNuke modules, you'll do a custom business object that will hit your concrete providers for your abstract data provider, which will do whatever data store you want or you're using. So that's just a quick overview to give you kind of a look at it from that standpoint. So when we start talking about architecture, a lot of times people look at it from different viewpoints. For instance, how many of you have heard of DotNetNuke being called a CMS, or a content management system? Most of you. How many of you use it as a content management system? Okay, a couple. Normally I get a lot of people that do that. How many of you have heard it called a web application? A few. How about an application framework? A couple, a few in there. And a multi-portal system. You know, you listen to people talk about it, you read the blogs, you look at the comparisons between DotNetNuke and other products. And there's some weird things that go on. For instance, DotNetNuke is compared to portals software. It's compared to content management systems. And recently read an evaluation of DotNetNuke compared to a content management system. It says, well, DotNetNuke doesn't have this feature, this feature, and this feature. They're working on some of those features, but it was never intended to have those features as a built-in functionality. So it's being sometimes compared to things it wasn't really starting out to be. But people use it that way. When people ask me what DotNetNuke really is, I normally tell them that it's an application framework. Now, it's unusual in an application framework in that it comes out of the box with a working application. Not many do. In fact, most application frameworks are designed to work with Windows forms rather than web forms, or sometimes both, but they have no base application to work from. DotNetNuke does. It comes with multi-portal capabilities, and many people use it as a CMS. So that's kind of the way I want us to think about it as we go through and start, thank you, as we go through and start talking about the architecture. What's important about the architecture? Well, to start with, let's say that smart people don't always get it right. Now, have you ever had somebody make a mistake or do it right and it still not work right? How many of you have ever heard of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge? Yeah, there's several people out here. This is one of the things I realized. This is a video that was shot in 1940. This bridge was opened in 1940. It was the third largest suspension bridge at the time. And what you're seeing there is concrete and steel. This is real, folks. It did this long enough. How many video cameras were there in 1940? Think about that for a minute. Okay?
Both of them.
It did this long enough for several video cameras to come and take pictures of this. Some of you know what this is going to do when I play it. But understand that smart people, I'll give it play. There we go. Smart people don't always get it right. Can you imagine concrete and steel doing that? To say the least, after, I forgot how long it was a while. But remember, it was doing this long enough for video cameras to get there in 1940. So after a while, it actually did shake itself apart. It was open for about 4 months before it fell apart. Smart people don't always get it right. Sometimes things have to be done over. Architecture is important because one size does not fit all. In the DotNetNuke world, this is probably the thing that hits the most people at home. One size just doesn't happen. You want something else, you want something else, and I want something else. And so it's got to be flexible enough to handle all of these desires. Also, requirements will change. I've never been on a project where the requirements that started out were not the requirements we finished with to start with. So let's say you get one of those exceptional projects where you get your requirements, you complete the project, you have a fully working application. Guess what? Time passes. Technology changes. Requirements will change. One way or another, requirements are going to change. Architecture is important. This last point here I put down that architecture sets boundaries. I didn't like the way that sounded, so I said architecture acts as a roadmap. And it's kind of a combination of the two. Because anytime you use a framework of some kind, you're going to set limits on what you do, but you also hopefully get a lot out of that. So it helps you to go the direction you need to be going. One of the nice things about DotNetNuke and any well-designed framework is that it encourages good programming practices. DotNetNuke provides a lot of this in its architecture by using design patterns. One of the major design patterns used is the provider pattern. And I want us to take a few minutes to look at the provider pattern. Somebody was asking questions about it in the session before this, about how do you change the authentication provider? How do you, can you do these things? And I want to give you show you how this can be done. Most people, when you get to this point, kind of throw their hands up because they say, wait a minute, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. Well, let's think of it this way for a minute. When you think of DotNetNuke, most people think of DotNetNuke as having all these capabilities, as having these services or functionality. And I want you to start thinking of it as DotNetNuke is a core that uses these functionalities. That might be a better way of adding it in your hand. Because any one of these can be changed out. If you don't like the way the scheduling works, you can change it without changing the core. And that's very, very important. If you are to go in and modify the core of an application, when version 6 comes out, all your modifications are screwed. So don't modify the core. That's the point. In fact, DotNetNuke Corp is going where they're pulling more and more of the external things out of the core and making them providers, making them interfaces, so that people can use them, can modify them without modifying the core. They can replace these things. For instance, if you don't like the logging, you can put your own logging provider in and thus use a different type of logging. Let's take a look at this so I can show you how this works. What I have here is a source code installation. Now I'm using the source code simply because I want to show you some source code. You don't need it to be able to do these things. But for you to see these things, and I'll show you the things you need in bigger print. But to start with, I want us to look at the providers. We're going to go look at the logging providers, since that was what we're talking about. And you can see that there's two that are provided. An XML logging provider and a DB logging provider. Obviously, one of them logs to an XML file, the other logs to a DB file, to a database.